You are never going to experience unconditional love ever in your lifetime. And no, it's not because you're unworthy of it. No, it's not because you do not deserve it. No, it's not because there's something wrong with you or that you just haven't met the right one yet. The reason why you will never experience unconditional love is because it doesn't exist. Yeah. Okay, that seems like a very, very like heavy way to start this episode, but like I'm just gonna roll with it, okay? And there is a little bit of hyperbole in what I just said, but hear me out. Hold on, hear me out. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good whatever time of the day you are listening to this. You are welcome to the award-winning podcast Volatile Times with Daniel, and I am your host, Daniel Briggs Adisa, here to bring you another one. How was Valentine's? I hope you guys enjoyed Valentine's, at least for those of us that had something to do on Valentine's. And then I think after Valentine's was Galentine's. Ladies, I hope you guys took yourselves out. I hope you did it away from the boys, okay? But all of that said, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. If this is your first time listening to this episode, hello, welcome. Love to have you here. Today's topic is a little bit of a hear me out. I have, should I say, somewhat controversial thoughts about the idea of unconditional love. And while I'm not going to be discussing all of them here, I want to discuss what I think unconditional love is, or at least what I think we all mistake it to be. So if you are down for that, tune in, sit down, get your earpiece, get your popcorn, whatever it is you need. Get a notepad if you want. Or you could just leave this on while you do your house chores or whatever it is you're doing. But listen, nonetheless, okay? Listen. Like, split your brain into three and dedicate one to this episode. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this episode will probably seem scandalous given that it is coming literally the week after Valentine's weekend. Like, Valentine's weekend literally was last week as I'm recording this, and this is coming out this Saturday after. It feels like an attack. I am single. I am not paired up with a brethren. So, it might seem like, okay, he's come for us, but I wanted to be extended a little bit of grace, so I didn't release this episode on Valentine's weekend because trust me, I really don't have anything against Valentine, and I will not be looking to attack it. Not this year, thank God. But anyway, I want to talk about unconditional love and how unconditional love doesn't exist. But if you just listen to the intro of this episode and you left without, finishing the entire episode, you most likely have the wrong idea as to what I mean or what it is that I'm trying to speak of. So that is why I said, hear me out. So let's begin. What exactly is it that I am trying to say? Well, it's not so straightforward. I need to build up my case for it. So let's begin with looking at language. Yes, we are going to nerd out a little bit. Okay. Now, I am not an academic on language. I am not a language nerd or an etymology nerd or anything like that. I am simply just someone who understands the basics of language theory and tries to apply that into every day of his life. So, disclaimer done with. Language is very, very special. Language is that tool that it seems only human beings technically have the command of right now. I mean, you could argue that lower animals, quote unquote, lower animals, have other forms of communication, which we could in some form term language. But given that it doesn't possess the same structure and applicability as to what we call language, language is very special and it seems to be a human only thing. So now in language, we have words, right? And contrary to how most of us get introduced to the concept of language at the meaning of words, words in and of themselves don't mean anything. Yeah, I know, shocker, right? Whether we're looking at theories or philosophies of language like structuralism or conventionalism or Ludwig Wittgenstein's language games, all those kind of things, one thing I think is clear in the study of language and the philosophy of language as a whole, words don't mean anything. According to the scholar sorry, I'm gonna butcher people's name in this like episode, and I won't be name dropping that much simply because I don't want to be butchering. Okay, so I promise most of these thoughts are mine, but I need some things to like flesh it out. Okay, so according to Ferdinand de Sousa, let's just stick with Ferdinand. Okay, according to Ferdinand, who was like a foundational figure in structuralism for the philosophy of language. He argued that languages are made up of signs, and each sign is consisting of two things: the signifier, that is the word, and what that word signifies. And he argues that there is no inherent relationship between the signified and its signifier. So, to put this into example, look at something near you. Look at whatever it is that is near you. If you are seated on a chair, let that chair be our example. If you are lying down on a bed, let that bed be an example. If you are staring at an apple, let that apple be an example. If you are staring at a cup, let that cup be an example. And now ask yourself the question: is that thing a cup, a bed, a chair, an apple, because naturally and inherently it is a cup, a bed, or an apple? Or is it that because we call it that? The question I'm posing to you right now is a question that questions what you think meaning is and how you think meaning is derived in and of itself. Because if words don't mean anything inherently, naturally by themselves, then how do we know any word to mean anything? How do you understand the things that I am actually talking about right now? Well, that can also be explained. Simply put, words do not represent things that already have defined names. Like even biologists would say this all the time, and scientists would say this all the time, that nature is not categorized. We apply categories and classifications to nature, but just because we say human beings are Homo sapiens doesn't actually mean that nature calls us Homo sapiens. We are Homo sapiens because that is the categorization that we have given ourselves, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that what we are supposed to be called is Homo sapiens. Just like the color green. The reason why we call it color green is because that is the socially agreed upon name that's what is going to be called. Understanding this will help you free up your mind in so many ways, because it took me a while to like grasp this idea. Because if you say words don't mean anything, then nothing means anything, right? Which is actually not the way you are supposed to go with that. Like, is this nihilist way of thinking where everybody goes, oh, nothing means anything, there's no objective morality, there's no objective meaning, so which means nothing matters. It's like, that's not really what the argument is, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the talk of language. If words do not have any inherent meaning, if I say water and water is not water because in nature it has its name imprinted on it called water, but it's called water because we call it water, then that can explain why I can say water. And you can either think drinking water, or you can either think, make me sweat, make me harder, make me lose my breath, make me water. Well, oh gosh, I did not just do that. Now, I don't think anybody with, established understanding of social common sense would listen to the lyrics of that song and think, oh my God, Tyler is talking about drinking water. No, she's not, baby. And if you thought that, oh God, let me hold your hand while I say, no, she's not. Why do I keep hitting things? Anyway. Now, the reason why we understand that she's not is due to something called semantic theory. Now, semantic theory is another aspect of the study of language and the philosophy of language that seeks to understand not just the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences and different things like that, but rather how they are actually used in communication. So you look at the literal meaning of the word, but also how it is used. Because words mean way much more than their dictionary meanings suggest. I used to tell my students that dictionaries don't tell you what a word means. Dictionary tells you how that word is being used or has been used. And we can see this in so many different instances. Just like the example that I put forward with Tyler. When Tyler is saying, make me sweat, make me harder, make me lose my brain, make me water, She is not talking about drinking water, neither is she talking about a river water, neither is she talking about water in the sea. And you can see how that word water in and of itself encompasses different categories and different objects that it refers to. And when we get to deeper levels of specificity, we start to understand the context of water that we are talking about way much more clearly. But at the same time, we know that those words can be used outside of their literal context. The whole thing I'm trying to drive out here with this mini, very naive, very amateurish lecture in the introduction to philosophy of language is that language is subjective. Words are subjectives. Words don't naturally mean anything except what we have socially agreed them to mean. Now, when I say socially agreed them to mean, obviously it doesn't mean that we are all constantly hosting like council meetings or Twitter spaces to determine what the meaning of words are, but rather the meanings of these words are constructed by social understanding. So some of the meanings are already inherited. For instance, sky, we already know what sky means without having to have a discussion on why sky is sky. Although there are people who do that, so that's their whole field of study. I am not them, we are not them. We're going to move on now. So people do study how words come to be words, how their meanings come to be the meaning that we ascribe to them nowadays. But what we need to understand for this entire episode is that words are subjectives. Words don't naturally mean anything. Whatever you think a word means, right, is the meaning it has currently in the context of the culture that you are in. So take, for example, let's say I and a friend of mine, right? Let's say we are hooking up secretly and we don't want anybody to know that we are hooking up. Now, we could use regular lingo and, we could use the like slangs and different things like that. But it won't work well. So we take regular meaning language. So take, for example, let's say I send them a message that I am hungry, right? And then it comes with a plate emoji or something like that. If somebody reads that text, they will think, oh, I'm saying I am hungry, I want to eat something, right? But to us, between us, we have come to understand that whenever I type that, it's the same thing as me saying I am horny, I am aroused, I want to have a secret link up with you, sneaky link. Can we see how that phrase or the question or whatever it is that says I am hungry has come to take on a different meaning due to the social agreement between I and my sneaky link, that friend who we are hooking up privately, right? And I don't know why that's the example that came to my head, but you're going to run with it, okay? So understanding and establishing that words are subjective, words do not naturally mean anything. Whatever meaning it is that we have for words that we currently use, those meanings do not come pre-established, they come post-established. Understanding all of that, what does this now have to do with the concept of unconditional love? Here's the thing I want to tell you. Love is a goddamn amoeba. Now, what is an amoeba? Or for those of us that grew up in some particular type of places, Amoeba. And to be very honest, even now, Amoeba just sounds like the better way to pronounce that word, because what is amoeba? Like, what is that? What is that? Nigerians always know how to pronounce things better. Amoeba. 2 syllables, 3 at most, depending on how you're pronouncing things. Amoeba. Okay, so amoeba, potato. Anyway, the reason why I said love is an amoeba is because love is a very, very hard to pin down concept. Don't get me wrong, love exists. I am not here to tell you that love doesn't exist. Even if we want to say love is the experience of love or the act of loving somebody or loving anything is just an event of chemicals coming together and colliding and giving you a sweet concoction in your head, it is still an experience you are having. So whether you want to say, oh, it is just a bunch of chemicals firing in your brain, or you want to make it something supernatural, it is an event that you are experiencing, and so it does exist. But here's the thing about love, though. And if you grew up Christian, you learned this very early. There are different types of love. Now, see how I made that seem like as if, oh, Christians get like this very superb education growing up about the nature of life and social conventions. No, we don't. It's just everybody learns early that there are different types of loves, but it gets emphasized in a certain way in church. through Sunday school, where you learn about the 4 different types of love in the Bible. You learn about the eros, which is, the sexual and lustful love. The major book in the Bible that is usually used to explain this is the Songs of Solomon. Although I think that other books in the Bible can also be used to explain it very well, but not today. You have your eros, then you have your storge. I think storge is familial love in some sense. Yeah, I think storge is like familial love. Then you have your philos, which is, I think, a friendly type of love, a platonic type of love. And then you have your agape, which is the one that is usually termed to be the unconditional love. And we'll get there. But the main cocoa is love comes in different shapes, forms, and sizes. Love comes in different manifestations and experiences. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to talk about love in our society, especially when we are trying to teach what love is and describe what love is and define love, is that love is kind of something you can't define if we're really being honest. The best definitions of love that I've ever seen are actually descriptions. And most of those descriptions usually come from one or two places. Is that it either comes from a place of hope, hoping that this is what love is and this is how I want to experience love. So it's like a wishful thinking, or it comes from experience. This is how I've experienced love, or this is how I have not experienced love yet, and I hope that my experiencing of love will be like this. So whether I write a poem about love, or whether I write a letter about love, or whether I write an essay about love, it's either coming from a place of experience or from a place of wishful thinking, aka hope. But regardless, love is very difficult to pin down as a concept. It's very difficult to find a particular coat size for love and think that once you're done sewing the coat today, it will size it tomorrow, because love is an amoeba. It doesn't have a specific shape. It doesn't have a specific format that it follows. Love usually manifests and declares itself differently for each and every single one of us. So if the very experiencing of such a fundamental and curious aspect of our life is very subjective, if love is such a thing that nobody can really define, and any definition we tend to give to it never always seems to fit each scenario or context that it belongs in, then what about unconditional love? When you hear the word or the phrase unconditional love, when you hear the term unconditional love, what comes to mind? For some of us, it is romance. For some of us, it is a parental type of love that always supports you. For some of us, it's literally that word, support, or we can add unconditional support to it. For some of us, it is a lover. For some of us, it is a hope. For some of us, what comes to mind is God. But even in that, can we see how our conceptualization and thinking of the concept of unconditional love is actually not the same all across board? Yes, there will be similarities in how we define and experience love, but they are never really truly the same. Honestly, sometimes I think that the attribution of unconditionality to the concept of love is humanity's way of trying to trap love, in the sense that we are trying to do this thing where we take something that is so enigmatic, so undefinable, so unstructurable, and we try to give it a sense of fundamentalism. We try to give it a sense of definiteness. We say it is unconditional, right? So, because when you talk about love, I'm in love with this person, oh, I love you. And when we say, oh, an unconditional love, we tend to see those two as very separate concepts, because through the identifier or modifier of unconditional that we've attached to love, we see unconditional love as a different entity, a different concept in and of itself, even sometimes divulged from the concept of love in and of itself. But unconditional love is an offshoot of the concept of love. We cannot talk about unconditional love without first trying to talk about love, and then we hit a roadblock. If love is very subjective, if love is not so easily defined and easily ascertained and structured, then what makes us think that unconditional love escapes that problem? I personally don't think it does. I personally think unconditional love cannot necessarily be defined in such straightforward ways as we would like it to be. Let's do a little bit of experiment. Remember the things I said about language? This is where it's going to come full circle, hopefully. I want you to listen to this phrase, pause after you're done listening to it, and think about it. What is the very thing that comes to your head? The phrase is a glass of water. You can go ahead, pause for like a minute or two and think about it. What comes to your head? A glass of water. Are you done thinking? Okay. Now, via social convention, if I say a glass of water, all of us know exactly what it is I'm talking about. I'm talking about a glass cup filled up with water. But here's the funny thing though. Me saying a glass of water doesn't necessarily communicate a glass cup filled with water. If we're looking at just the words in and of themselves, the very sentence itself is vague. It's vague in the sense that when I say a glass of water, what kind of glass do I mean? What type of water do I mean? Yes, there are types of water. What type of water do I mean? If maybe I'm talking about a glass bowl, or maybe I'm talking about an aquarium, or maybe I'm talking about a glass box, or maybe I'm talking about whatever thing that is made of glass. A glass of water. Is it a glass bowl of water? Is it a glass cup of water? Is it a glass kettle of water? Is it a glass jug of water? And when I say water, what type of water do I mean? Do I mean hard water or do I mean soft water? Do I mean salt water or do I mean fresh water? Do I mean treated water or distilled water? Do I mean sparkling water? And you understand what I'm trying to drive at. While this does introduce a measure of complexity to the matter, it still is about the fact that the reason why you understand me saying a glass of water is not because naturally that phrase simply just means a glass cup of water. It's because we have preconceived understandings. We have pre-established understandings of what particular words and what particular composition of words are meant to mean. This is why they teach us grammar in school, and this is why we learn how to read in between the lines, aka establish contexts. So what does that have to do with unconditional love? Well, if naturally the very phrase of a glass of water does not immediately inherently mean a glass cup of water or a glass bowl of water, why do we assume that whenever somebody says unconditional love, it automatically means the same thing that we think is unconditional love? Somebody might take this as me, poisoning the well, overcomplicating the matter, but I seriously need us to think about what that means. What do we think unconditional love is? And are we sure that our definition or conceptualization of unconditional love is the same as that of the person who we are communicating to? We understand the general concept of unconditional love, some sort of love that doesn't immediately end or is not terminated due to some pre-established conditions. And while I will argue that unconditional love is very conditional, let's not talk about that. That's another episode. I'm here to argue that unconditional love does not exist as a singular concept, as a singular, globally defined concept. Unconditional love is not a thing. This reminds me, let me go off on a tangent a bit here. This reminds me of the frustration I tend to have with fellow Christians whenever, if somebody asks what is love, and they say, God is love, and they think that kind of answers something. It doesn't. It really doesn't. Because first off, you're assuming that, your conceptualization and understanding of the concept and being of God is the same as the person that you're communicating to. That's the very first one. Secondly, you're assuming that they understand the attributes of the Christian God the same way you think they do. That's the second assumption. And the third thing is that you think a secular definition gives any clarity to anything. If you ask me what is that, and I'm like, it is what it is, and I'm like, yes, okay, it is what it is, but what is it? And it's like, and you're still like, it is what it is. Can you see how that doesn't really answer anybody's question? So many people do not understand, or I found that some Christians do not understand why people just don't like answers like that when people say, oh, God is love, God is goodness. It doesn't really answer anything, because the questions they are asking is not a question of whether that thing exists or whether it is grounded in anything. They are asking that question to determine whether it is something that they can conceptualize and they can see materialized or hope to be materialized in their own world. So, again, I ask, what is unconditional love? And what conditions need to be established for it to be unconditional? See what I did there? Again, I'm not going to talk about it this episode. I'm itching so much to talk about it, about how unconditional love itself is very conditional, but not today. If you ask me what unconditional love means, or rather what it means to me, or how I see unconditional love, I would say I don't see unconditional love as anything concrete, because I don't even really think unconditional love is that much of a thing that we should all be looking for. I think unconditional love is more so a hope rather than a reality. Like I established before, we put the moniker or the qualifier of unconditional in front of love, and we hope that makes love a little bit much more special. We hope that makes love a little bit much more concrete and definable, that regardless of what circumstance, regardless of what context we dwell in or anybody existing at the moment, you can always identify this thing as unconditional love. And usually for many people, that comes in the frame of unconditional support, regardless of whatever it is that I have done wrong. Hey, I hit my mic. Regardless of whatever it is that I have or might have done wrong, you still love me and support me regardless. But here's the thing though, even in that concept or that notion of unconditional support, it's not the same. Because for you, unconditional support means they continue to provide, continue to listen to you, continue to be your friend despite every single thing that you have done wrong and all of the mistakes you have made and probably repented from. But for somebody else, unconditional love might simply be them fulfilling their duty regardless of how they feel about you, and they do not need to hold or harbor any notion of goodness towards you. This, I think, is what some parents even operate under, where it's like, oh, no matter what bad your child has done, he could not have done something so bad to the extent that you push him to the mouth of the lion. That comes from a Yoruba proverb. Trust me, I would have said it in actual Yoruba, but I do not I can't remember the words in my head, so just take it like that. For some other people, unconditional love is simply just somebody who will always be by their side. It doesn't mean that they are extra helpful. It doesn't mean that they are constantly contributing something, but just that their presence is there and they have access to them. That is unconditional love. The more you start to investigate what your notions of love and unconditional love are, the more you start to realize that they might not be what you thought them to be, specifically in your own context. And sometimes whatever context you establish for love, specifically how you want to experience love and how you want to give love back, and even up to the context of unconditional love, it differs, and sometimes it will clash with some other people's own. And this is why, things like love languages and conflict languages and all those kind of stuff, kind of took us by storm, because it helped us simplify a little bit how we talk about this concept. But then we've made the mistake of thinking that that's all there is to it. Oh, my love language. Except there are way much more than 5 love languages. There are way much more than 5 ways that anybody wants to be loved. And sometimes those things are amalgamations. Sometimes they compete with each other. You like physical touch, they like physical touch, but the way you like physical touch is different from the way they like physical touch. And sometimes that shit is going to conflict. And now you're going to think, oh, no, they don't actually like physical touch the way they say they do. Because every time I try to touch them in this particular way, they always don't respond that positively. The problem is not that they don't like physical touch like they said. The problem is that they don't like physical touch the way you want them to like physical touch, or the way you have come to like physical touch. Even in all of these things, all experiences are subjective. Nothing objective really drives them. In fact, the only thing that is objective in any of these things is you. And if there's anything that we have come to establish about any human being so far, is that no human being is objective. We are all subjective down to our very DNA. So, if you've been listening so far and you did not run away from the very beginning or midway into this episode, you have come to realize that when I said you will never experience unconditional love, that was kind of a lie. I was just trying to like grab your attention, right? But let me make an amend. You will never experience unconditional love in the sense that it is this one thing that anybody can give you. No. You will never experience unconditional love because you don't even know what unconditional love is, or at least how you would like to define it and experience it. You would never experience unconditional love, not because it doesn't exist at all, but because if you still keep trying to find love in this very fixed notion, you might just miss it. So, in conclusion, words don't mean jack shit. Words mean whatever it is we want words to mean. And in the spirit of that understanding of language, love itself is a very vague thing. Love is an Amoeba, ambiguous little bastard. Love cannot be easily pinned down, neither can it be easily understood or defined. And its offshoot, unconditional love, does not escape that. If anything, it inherits that nature from its papa. And yeah, that is all I have for us for this particular episode. I hope this conversation, this whole thing, was able to spark some sort of thinking. Like, it made you like pause at some point and start thinking about some things. And it is not all doom and gloom. Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. The reason why I'm talking about these things is because I have come to realize that once we embrace the subjectivity of life, it allows us to much more insert ourselves in places where we can actually see ourselves being able to contribute and detach ourselves from places like that. So most of the time, you get less focused on how somebody else is going to come and love you and how other people define love, but more so firstly in how you define it and how you are willing to give it out to somebody else. You get to experience unconditional love after you have thought about it and defined it because you are the giver of it, and hence you have a definition, your definition of what it is. So when you give that out, hopefully somebody will emulate and give that back to you, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. It's not, if love doesn't mean anything, if you cannot define love, then, what's the point? It's like, that's the whole point. It is such a subjective experience that is full and rich in variety that you would definitely find one that fits your context a little bit much more than your daddy and mommy experienced, or your friend, for instance, right? So yeah, thank you so very much for listening. This has been Volatile Times with Daniel, and I am Daniel Briggs Adisa, the host. Remember to follow me on social media. Instagram is at Daniel Briggs. Twitter is at Daniel Briggs. Where else? I think there's TikTok too at Daniel Briggs. I haven't posted on TikTok in a while. I need to start posting back again. But anyway, thank you so very much. Do not forget to rate this podcast 5 stars on Apple, 5 stars on Spotify. You can leave a comment. Actually, announcements. It's now on YouTube, so you can also listen via YouTube Music, and you can also leave comments via YouTube Music. I want to see those comments, goddammit. Thank you very much.